Welcome everyone to our webinar this Wednesday. We're really excited to host a great discussion on how do we green affordable housing with the authors of the recent book, Blueprint for Greening Affordable Housing, Walker Wells and Kimberly Vermeer. While people go ahead and log in, I'm just going to cover just a little bit of an overview of USGBCLA and some of our upcoming events before we go ahead and get started. First of all, we're an independent organization out here in LA. We're the largest green building chapter in the country. Our focus is really on transforming Southern California into a more sustainable region for all. And we really mean that. So we focus primarily here on education and community engagement. And if you care about this kind of work, we really invite you to join our community. We're big believers of community and really trying to get the best people together to really help advance the work for our region. My name is Ben Stapleton. I'm the executive director here at USGBCLA. In terms of some upcoming content, you'll see we have this event here today in November. And then actually, thank God, we're closing out this week with looking at appliance energy efficiency standards around water specifically. We have a lot of training coming up in December. We have a workshop on healthy and sustainable product trends on December 3rd. We have some training on G-Pro on December 4th. We also have a virtual job fair on December 4th. This is going to be our third virtual job fair we've done over the last 6 months. This has been a very successful series for us, which we'll probably do well into next year. We also have some training on the Envision certification in December. And then we have a great series called Conversations on Construction with some female attorneys. We used to call them the leading ladies, but we decided Conversations on Construction was better. And it's a great half-hour segment on a really relevant construction topic. And they do a great job. And then I'm sure Walker will be happy that we have a Lead for Cities and Communities training in later here in December. This is actually the last time it will be free before it becomes a paid class next year. And this is part 2 of a series that you would need to get your LFC certificate to be able to do that work for Lead for Cities and Communities. Also want to mention our talent portal. So all that great content I mentioned is accessible on our website at usgbc-la.org/talent. We have green jobs there. We feature employers. Content like this is recorded and posted there. We also have a mentorship network that's linked to our talent portal. So please check that out. We have a number of committees. I won't go through every one, but our committees are groups of people just like we have today who are passionate about a particular topic. We're doing some great work in our Green Schools group, our Building Decarb group, our advocacy group. All of them are doing great work. So if you have an interest in one of these speaks to you, we invite you to come out and join. Also somewhat relevant today to the topic today, in June, we launched our Healthy Building Alliance, which is really focused on providing a framework to provide healthy space for anyone. So it's not a certification. It's available for any building owner or tenant. And it's a commitment to 5 simple principles around building health. We provide resources and support to really help to provide healthy space. And then I'm here to create a sustainable future for everyone. So become a member, join a committee, be a mentor, volunteer, support an initiative, or build yourself, but just come out and be engaged in the work we do. And if you feel inspired by some of the content that we have today, you can donate now by texting GREEN to 707070. We have a small nonprofit team, and anything you can do to help support our work really means a lot to us. So if you can spare anything, really appreciate that, especially in a year like this, which has not been an easy one. And thank you to our sponsors and partners who make our day-to-day work here possible. So with that, you've heard way too much from me. I'm going to turn things over to Kim and Walker, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the program. Kim, over to you if you want to share your screen.
Yep, I'm sharing the screen, and I'll say hello, everyone. Very happy to be here, visiting from Boston. Wish I were there in person, but glad to be able to talk to you today. I'm a green building consultant. I have a practice based in Boston and work a lot in the affordable housing and community development world. And was very happy to have known Walker for years, used the first edition of the book, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, when I was doing some professional education work. And when it was time to refresh the book, I was really glad that we decided to do it as a joint venture. So Walker, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Walker Wells. I'm a urban planner by background. Spent a lot of time, probably over 20 years, in green building in various forms with the different LEED rating systems, as well as the Enterprise Green Communities program, and have had a chance to work on a whole slew of buildings in Los Angeles, which is very rewarding for an urban planner. Mostly planners make documents and write policy statements, but it's really rewarding to be able to kind of drive through the region and say, well, I helped make that happen. I helped make that happen. And later today, we're going to hear from a couple projects that I'm particularly proud of and that I bring up all the time. So, so that's a little background on me. If we go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's our agenda for today. A little bit about the book, why we wrote it, what's included, and sort of a very kind of a skim through the chapters. And then we have a project chat that features Tina Chi, landscape architect. Project we met on was the Crest, and by Skid Row Housing. And then Brian DeAndrea, who is the president of Century Villages at Cabrillo. I don't know where we met. It feels like we've known each other forever, but we've done a lot of work together on this really cool place down in Long Beach. And then sort of a Q&A session following that.
So this is a little bit about why we wrote the book. And, you know, Walker, maybe you can just give a summary of the words on the page there about what was the motivator for you, and then I'll chime in again too.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, the motivator for me was Kim. She had used the previous version of this book that was about 10 years old at the time in a lot of the training that she's done with NeighborWorks America and the NeighborWorks sort of partnership organization around the country. And basically said, you know, it's 10 years, things have changed. And this idea of green affordable housing isn't just an idea anymore. There's lots of people who are doing it. We need to update the book and update sort of the premise, not so much can this be done, but how to do it right. And then we clarified sort of who we're focusing on. Kim will touch on this in a minute, that, you know, the project managers really are there through the duration of a project. And that's who we need to be helping, particularly this next generation of project managers. So I said, well, if we do it together, then we could actually make this happen, because I know how hard it is to write a book. Kim didn't know, now she does.
Now I know.
But thank goodness that she was game in that, you know, through a collaboration, which is something I think a lot about, you know, we've actually been able to pull it off and get the thing published. And here we are today, we're still friends. So far, so good.
Yeah, right. And one of the things I always appreciated about the book was having the substantive content of the chapters and then having that reinforced by the cases. And so for me, it was great to update the content, but I loved the process of identifying new projects and working with Walker to decide, you know, it wasn't a contest, so it wasn't the best 14 projects. It was projects that really covered a range of organizations and a range of locations and a big range of housing types. And each one tackling the challenges of delivering green to affordable housing in a new way. And what was interesting is when we started the process of rewriting the book, and this was to the point of it needed to be updated, we did go back and try to identify people from the original set of cases from the first book to see if we could do a where are they now kind of feature in the new book. And we couldn't find any of those people. They had all moved on, and it proved not possible. So we were really excited to bring a whole new set of cases and happy to be able to feature 2 of them today. So as Walker said, project managers, oh, we lost their people. They're supposed to be people in the center there. Project managers are the ones who drive the process. And at their core, they're trying to balance the planning, the financing, the construction, looking ahead to operations, thinking about their communities, where the projects are located, and the health and well-being. But then all of those have elements that we know are informed by green thinking about how they can be done. And so a project manager needs to expand from that core set of disciplines and practices to include the outer ring as well. And so through the book, we try to give them the information and the tools they need to be able to do that. And we were really pleased that Jonathan Rose, who is a leading green for-profit developer based in New York, wrote the foreword for our book. And he really got at the issue of social equity and how historically housing for low-income people is in economically and environmentally disadvantaged areas, and that the quality of the housing is suspect, and that green affordable housing is an important way to offset and to bring us toward more social and environmentally just places. And he calls for weaving threads that each of us in the work that we're doing in doing green buildings and especially affordable housing are creating this tapestry of solutions to create a better world. So we're grateful for him. So as we said, the book, we've got 6 content chapters. The why, and talking about the relationship of affordable housing to sustainability and to social equity and how all of those fit together. And then we go through the development process, the integrated design, and also the best practices and the basics of energy, water, materials, location, stormwater management, all of those basics of what it takes to do green building. And then we cover, and also financing, because you have to figure out how to pay, how to make the numbers work to make it work. And then once it's done, green operations. And we also know that we want project managers and organizations to be secure in the fundamentals, because we don't live in a static world. There's all kinds of changes and pressures. And as we know, 2020 slammed us into the trends we had identified, which were social equity, thinking about the connections between health and housing, trying to understand how buildings fit within communities and what it means to green beyond the building, and really changing our thinking from energy efficiency to carbon and getting rid of carbon. And 2020 has brought all of those things right into our faces. And then of course we have the 14 case studies. So making the case. Is this still my slide, Walker?
Mhm.
Okay. Most of the people here at this meeting probably know about the definition of sustainable development, of meeting the needs for today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And we see this as trying to balance these 3 things: the equity, the environment, and the economy. And we're seeking mutually beneficial solutions. And the way this plays out in affordable housing, we summarized in this chart. So if we think about, for affordable housing on its own, it's providing decent and safe homes. Most affordable housing providers also offering some level of social services and resident supports. And they are bringing important, stable, predictable, affordable housing into many communities where that is a scarce resource. For families and for communities, they bring stable housing and predictable housing costs that are very important. And usually housing is located in places where residents have better access to jobs, to education, and to services. And by locating housing, much of it is located in places where there's good transportation and connections that reduce the use of cars, so help with environmental impacts of development. But then if we think about how green building can expand those benefits. In terms of equity, the focus on healthy environments is really important, and also considerations of ways to increase physical activity and connecting, putting housing in places where people can walk and bike, either for just recreation or for daily activities, or even for commuting to school and work. And also, when we choose safer materials and healthier materials, it doesn't just help the people who live in the homes, it helps the construction workers who build the homes, and it's something that's better for the manufacturing workers and in the work that they do. And in terms of economy, the focus on operating costs and energy costs really helps to control expenses for both residents and organizations. And durability and resilience help to sustain assets over time, which is good for the organizations, for the residents, and for the communities that the housing is in. And finally, in terms of environment, promoting the green building says, let's build where we already have access to services, where we can increase density, where we can improve ability for people, we can have more people, so businesses are healthier because there's more shoppers, and we can help mitigate climate change by using less energy for getting around. And importantly, when we add affordable housing and affordable housing communities into the mix, with the emphasis on resident engagement and resident supports, we build the social cohesion that's so critical to thinking about climate resilience.
Okay, so thank you, Kim. So that's the setup for sort of why we wrote the book and some of these basic sort of building blocks about how, from our perspective, adding green really is sort of an augmenting factor, a plussing up factor on the sort of the core value of affordable housing. So if you believe this premise, then you get into this question of like, how the heck do we do all of this? And as we went through the book, tried to decide what we needed to talk about, we said this idea of the integrated design process is fundamental. It was fundamental before, it continues to be fundamental to greening anything, but certainly affordable housing. And one of the kind of pithy aphorisms that we came up with is this idea that, a building is a system, design is a process. And a building is effectively a system made of all kinds of systems, envelope system, a mechanical system, a ventilation system. But to get that system to work correctly, we really need to think of design as a process. And so we try and lay out what this process should look like to deliver the best green results. A key premise in all of this that many of us have heard again and again is start early. And usually that says so you don't miss opportunities, because it's harder to integrate things later on. All of that's true, but there's also kind of cost, sort of emotional cost, physical cost, and financial cost associated with trying to figure out how to get to be LEED Platinum or Living Building Challenge or net zero when you're at 75% construction documents, versus when you've just sort of closed on the property and trying to figure out what to do. And I'm had just experienced this in the last couple of weeks, a project that's probably close to completed with design development, looked at participating in the International Living Futures affordable housing program and achieving their standards. And it was too many things would have needed to change. So we're going to try on the next building. But the main concept here is that when you're in the early stages of picking a site, getting the density and the parking figured out, its opportunity is very high, and the cost of exploring these different scenarios is very low, because it's the cost of a conversation. And as you move through the process, somewhere around design development, the lines switch, and the cost of introducing new things becomes high, and the opportunity to do it decreases significantly. And a large reason for that, I learned from somebody, was that you don't just have to pay money to do new things, you have to pay money to undo things, and then you have to pay money to do things. And so you kind of get, ding twice by not starting early. Next slide. Right. I think
All
these are,
right, back to me.
yes.
All right, so I'm going to assume that this audience is pretty savvy about basic green practices, but we'll briefly go through the topics that we cover in what is our longest chapter in the book. And the first part is you got to build in the right kind of places, and you have to think about your site design, the orientation, and the massing of your building. Stormwater management, dealing with exterior water use and water conservation, both outside and inside, are also really critical. Of course, we know using less energy, thinking about carbon neutrality, carbon positive, how to incorporate renewables, all critical. And then we want resource efficient materials so that we are reducing the environmental impact of the materials we choose for building. And we need to think about indoor environmental quality, which is ventilation and off-gassing of materials and other things like that. So just briefly, it still matters a lot. Where does the sun rise? Where does the sun set? What is the difference between how it does that in mid-November compared to how it does that in mid-June? And how can we make the sun and the wind work for us in terms of our design, our comfort, our energy use in our buildings? And as you can see here, are we near transit? Do we have good sidewalks, bike lanes? Do we have the capacity to incorporate the project into its neighborhood and its community in ways that make it an asset? Stormwater management, these are two different kinds of solutions. On the left, it's a rain garden. And of course, speaking to people in LA, I guess you have terrible storms and then you have a lot of water and then it doesn't rain for a long time, right? So these are both north and wet examples in Grand Rapids, Michigan in the Midwest, where they're trying to capture rain between the sidewalk and the road through vegetated strips and more intentional rain garden style landscaping for the edge of the sidewalk. And then a green roof at a project here in Boston, over in East Boston, helping with the stormwater mitigation for the rain coming off the roof. And of course, inside, we know that if we switch to WaterSense qualified fixtures and other low flow fixtures, we can dramatically reduce the amount of water, focusing especially on faucets, showers, clothes washing, dishwashing, toilets, trying where we can. And we know that now the leading edge of this, maybe the bleeding edge, is thinking about gray water and recycling water and all those kind of things. And I would imagine that that's where we would expect the leading edge to keep pushing out on that to get to water positive or water neutral at sites as well. But we can always start with WaterSense rated appliances, fixtures. Of course, with energy, I like to say that the most important energy in a building is the energy it's never ever going to need. And so that means building high quality envelopes and making sure that we need as little energy as possible to keep people comfortable. And then when we've done that, then let's try to supply that energy from clean sources like PV or even solar hot water. In terms of resource efficient materials, can we think about how we build and the materials that we use and try to minimize the environmental impact of extraction and manufacturing? And then an important element of that as well is, can we build in durable ways so that our buildings last longer? If we can have a building that lasts 50 years or 100 years or 150 years, that is an efficient use of the materials and allows other materials to be used for new building rather than rebuilding. Indoor environmental quality, that we experience as the choice of the materials we use for finishes and try to limit the amount of volatile organic compounds and other off-gassing from materials. And we put in good quality ventilation systems. And this is one thing that's been really important this year as we face COVID, is that many of the green buildings, especially in affordable housing, um, they function better because they have good quality ventilation systems, systems that are designed to bring direct fresh air into units and exhaust it from units, and in a process of compartmentalizing, make each unit, even in a multifamily building, stand alone from a ventilation standpoint, so that the air is not being shared with the corridors, it's not being shared with the next door neighbors. And that really offers a protective effect for people worried about airborne transmission of disease. And of course, trying to limit smoking or prevent smoking in buildings from a health point of view. The exposure to environmental tobacco is a real trigger for asthma and other respiratory illnesses, so we want to try to avoid that as well. And then comfort is an important element of indoor environmental quality. If we build fancy systems, but the people who are living in the apartments can't figure out how to be comfortable, they will undo our fancy systems. And so making sure that we are right sizing systems so that they function correctly, and then giving individuals controls so that they can be the right temperature for their situation, their family situation. It's really critical to indoor environmental quality. So just giving you a little snapshot, a look ahead to our case discussion, how all of this comes into play in a project. Walker, were you going to do this, or should I finish this one? Okay, I'll give it back to Walker.
And so, yeah, these are just a few snapshots, and we're going to hear from Brian and Tina in a little bit. But both of these projects, Century Villages at Cabrillo and then the Crest, are in the book as case studies and sort of a highlight on sort of the role of sort of landscape and how the site is treated in concert with the building. So, green practices at Century Villages at Cabrillo. Couple of lead buildings, but sort of starting with the lead building became a catalyst for a discussion about really thinking of the campus as a neighborhood and looking at lead for neighborhood development. And we'll have Brian be able to share a little bit more about that. Go to the next slide. So you can see the extent of the new construction, but we'll get to hear about the extent of all of the buildings, but also the amazing amount of sort of services, the fairly large population of people that live there, as well as what you see in this diagram from the master plan about sort of the vision for how things can get built out over time to make it even more village-like, more walkable, more cohesive, and more sustainable. And then the next slide. This gives you a quick overview of the Crest. Tina will be talking about the landscape. It's a very attractive building, but I think the landscaping is probably the most seductive. It's certainly very interesting how a lot of these problems have been solved, which we'll learn about. It's a LEED for Homes Platinum building. Ambitious architecture, but also I think demonstrates how green and design can be mutually sort of beneficial. One thing that I just noticed with this project was because there was such an attention to design that the contractors became incredibly diligent about fixing things. So, I could not believe the level of care and finishes that went into this, but they just say, well, the architects are demanding it, so we can't screw around on this project. So it's almost just by like force of will. So we'll hear more about that one. And then, this next section is just about cost and financing. So it's easy to get into platitudes and housing as a human right and sustainability and restorative design, integrated design process. But of course, things do cost money. So we need to be very conscious about sort of managing cost and then thinking about what aspects of green building actually reduce costs or produce different kind of revenue streams or enable us to really sort of rejigger our assumptions about sources of cost and sources of revenue. The good news is that affordable housing has some unique opportunities to do just that and to sort of transcend this thing called the split incentive, which we'll talk about in a minute. All right, so just, other ways to think about costs is you really have to create this closer alignment between who's making the investment and who's, reaping the benefits of this investment. The mindset is a little bit different here when we're dealing with, sort of, income restricted, subsidized, affordable housing. The intent is to provide housing that's safe, decent, affordable, healthy. It's not necessarily a profit-driven undertaking. And so the way that sort of investments or sort of how money is spent can be thought about slightly differently, which means that the pro forma has the opportunity to sort of fold in green if we're strategic about it. One of the sort of most useful strategies is kind of derived from the way that rent is set in affordable housing. And so what happens is they'll say, here's the area median income. This is whatever we're looking at, 30 or 60 or 80% of area median income. A third of that can be spent on housing. Normally that would be the rent. But the way it works in subsidized housing is there's an acknowledgement that utility costs are part of your housing costs. And so what you see here is a standard utility allowance schedule would assume that while the housing expense could be $1,000, $150 a month needs to be sliced off of that to account for the assumed utility costs. So the rent going to the owner, Brian, would be $850. Now that might work if you're doing a conventional building, but if you're doing a LEED Platinum building that's highly energy efficient, you would say our utility costs are not going to be $150 a month. They're going to be lower. They might be $120 a month. And so let's do this. Let's give a little cushion to the tenant. But if we can actually reduce the utility costs and increase the rent, there's more revenue. And that revenue can be used to pay off more debt, for example. And it doesn't seem like a lot, $25 a month, but $25 a month across a 100-unit building, across a year, starts to become real money. And if you can start to borrow another $100,000 or $200,000, that can give you $4,000 or $5,000 to apply to these better green features in the units. And this is a way to sort of connect the dots between the upfront investments, the savings over time, and how to pay for green. Some of this thinking has found its way into the policies that are used to allocate the main financial tool for building low-income housing, which is the low-income housing tax credit. And these tax credits are allocated through a document called the Qualified Allocation Plan, established by each state. There's some fundamental things that need to be in the QAP, and then there's some discretionary items, including green building strategies. And when I was at Global Green, we would do this report every year where we analyze the QAPs nationally and gave people grades. And so you can start to see the dark green states, New York, Massachusetts, Ohio in that year. Louisiana was doing well. California was getting an A-. We've graded them across the whole number of smart growth, energy, water efficiency, health criteria. This became transformative because it started to make doing green effectively standard practice, and in recognition that it wasn't extra, it wasn't icing on the cake, it needed to be part of a project. And then we were able to, I think, see the benefits being delivered from these projects, and see more and more developers just making it part of what they do. Next slide. Okay, on to green operations.
Okay, so you can build a green building, but then what? And so in chapter 4, we talk about 3 different ways that green operations really are critical. The first is that if you build a new green project, you want to keep it green. And so just making sure that you implement practices, that staff get trained on how systems work, that residents get education about how their units function and what the features of the building are. Those are all really important things. But it's tempting to say, well, existing buildings, and they're the largest part of our stock, there's say, well, we can't do anything about that, but that's not true. There are a huge number of things that can be done just through operations to improve the performance and the function and the health of buildings. And so in the book, we go through a lot of recommendations for that. And then most affordable housing developers own more than one building. And so they are doing asset management where they're looking at their whole portfolio and thinking about what that means for ongoing management, maintenance, and costs, and small capital projects on an annual basis, and then thinking about retrofits and refinancing opportunities as projects go through their life cycles. So there are plenty of opportunities to invest in green thinking and green practices in asset management as well. And just as an example, at a minimum, if you think about a transformation to green operations, and we can ask Brian about how many of these they do at the villages. The first thing is to track what you're using. If you don't know how much energy and how much water your building is using, you don't know what to change. And then everywhere in the country, water conservation pays back faster than anything else. And so the next thing to do is to do even basic water conservation measures. I'm a big advocate for integrated pest management, or IPM, which is a much safer and healthier way to try to control pests. We want to transition to greener cleaning products and low VOC products wherever possible. Going smoke-free is really critical, and engaging residents to improve trash and recycling practices, energy use practices. That all goes a long way to greening an existing building. So, trends. We've got the basics down. We're building great buildings. We're operating them well, but the world doesn't stop. And oh my, we of course wrote this book a year and a half ago, right? And then the book came out this summer, right? And so
It was just a year ago, Kim. I think we had to send it off at the end of September of last year.
Yeah, it was September that we sent it off. It's true.
And then
true.
copy editing and all this stuff. It's finally done. And then it's March. And we're like, oh my God. We picked our 4 trends. We did not pick global pandemic as one of them.
But even before the global pandemic, it was clear that there's a growing understanding of the connections between housing and health. And COVID has only increased our awareness and our started to inform our thinking about what that means. And it's been a year for thinking about social equity, racial equity, community, social cohesion, and how that helps us deal with a stress, and whether it's a shock or stress, the chronic stresses. Communities that are coping better are communities that have invested in creating community glue, right? And as we've watched all the climate crises and we see policy, we're really seeing this marked shift to thinking about carbon as a driver, not just, even though it was always energy efficiency was about carbon, it wasn't talked about quite that way. But really the whole dialogue has changed now to directly connect, zeroing out the carbon to address the climate concerns, and to focus as much as we can on mitigation as well as adaptation as we think about climate. And we understand more than ever that it's not enough to do green just for buildings. That we really have to think about, what does it mean for neighborhoods? What does it mean for districts? What does it mean for communities? And then we have 14 cases to try to tell those stories so people can learn from seeing what others have done. And that's why we're very happy. Oh, I guess we have one more slide here. Just to say in summary that it takes collaboration to deliver sustainability, and that successful green buildings require successful green teams where there's a shared vision and definition of what people are trying to accomplish, and commitment and agreement on a structure and a process to deliver that. And it's affecting people's behaviors and bringing in a much wider range of skills earlier in the process than has sometimes been the practice. and trusting that everyone is on the same page and working toward the same goals and has value and perspective to contribute to the effort. So
Okay.
that brings us to 2 cases.
It does. And so, yes, so we're going to shift into the sort of discussion about the 2 cases. In the integrated design section, I thought there was going to be another slide about the charrette. And I realized that I met both, well, Brian probably pre-charrette, but I know that the first time that we spent sort of time chewing through a project deliberately on green building was in a charrette format over at the Century Housing offices there off of Slauson or over by Fox Hills. I was over there for another project just last weekend, Brian. I was like, oh, right, I remember this. This is how it all started. And then Tina, I think we met at the charrette that was done for the Crest, where we
That's right.
really, and I think in both instances, and this is, you know, an important point, is we talked about like who's going to live here and what's that lived experience going to be like. And it did result in a fair amount of discussions about not just the units, but the spaces between the units, the landscape, and you know, and what kind of features needed to be provided. And this is often a challenge that Kim and I are well aware of, is that we don't know necessarily who will live in the buildings that we work on. You know, there's often a waiting list and people apply, and so we, you know, we can't do the stakeholder outreach we might like to do. So it's sort of the onus is on us to sort of bring the residents into the room in that charrette and think about what their needs are. If they're formerly homeless or disabled or kids or whatever it is, and to sort of think about what kind of needs they have. So what we want to do now is just to have each of you share a little bit about each of your projects. And so we have Tina with Tina Chi Landscape Studio. And then Brian DeAndrea with Century Housing Corporation, Senior Vice President there. And Kim, I don't know which order our slides are. Is it Brian?
Tina.
Oh,
Tina is
okay.
first.
Okay.
Tina, I have to keep controlling the slides. So
Yeah. So right. So yeah. So thanks, Walker, for inviting me to this to share my experience on Crest Apartments, and I hope you know, it'll be of interest to everybody. So Crest Apartments, it was designed in 2013 and completed in 2016 for the Skid Row Housing Trust. So it's located in Van Nuys. And what's really important about this project is it's really the first time the trust is going way beyond, you know, well beyond the urban downtown core. So, you know, it was really a critical project, I think, for all of us thinking what, you know, they have a bigger site now. What does landscape mean in these terms? What, you know, type of landscape would be appropriate, you know, for these homeless veterans, or, you know, is it any different? So these were like questions, you know, we had, you know, what is it? And then, you know, I just want to remind everybody, 2013, we were at the height of our drought. I think it was already the 5th year. And, you know, we were coming at this thinking, can we even have landscape? Is this even going to be possible at all? And I had my serious doubts. It was just really just a real big challenge. You know, so we were thinking about sustainability, thinking about all these things. And I also want to remind us that, you know, we didn't have HHH funding at that time. We didn't have SB 1380. We had to deal with all the parking still, just like any other project. We didn't have any zoning adjustments. So it was really tough on us, you know, to really think about how we were going to get this all together during the drought. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So Van Nuys, it's the building is located, the project's located on a very typical street, you know, I think in Los Angeles, where you have mixed use housing, you know, mixed uses, you know, retail, housing. There's lots of traffic and noise, you know, not anything special. And so if you go to the next slide, just to give you a point of reference, this is our neighbor next door. And so I would say kind of the quintessential kind of thing where you'd have housing, you have parking, it's all on asphalt, you know, and just sort of this horrible situation that, you know, we find most of the buildings in Los Angeles perhaps have. And then this is our site as we found it. completely empty, full of weeds, didn't have any idea, no trees. These are all, on the perimeter of other properties. And so what was interesting, so let me just, the site, sorry, just a little bit about the site. The site, just to give you a frame of reference, it's 90 feet by 300 feet. So it's quite narrow and deep, which then of course, would cause a bunch of other issues. So just a couple of things we were thinking about. So it's a very small site. We have to pack 64 units onto this site. And so we started to think, because of the depth of the site, we had to incorporate a fire lane with a hammerhead turnaround. We still had to provide parking, which seemed completely ridiculous, of course, given it was for formerly homeless. But in fact, they did have cars, of course. It's LA, so you can never escape that. But in that kind of our naivete, I suppose, which perhaps was in our advantage, we thought, okay, let's challenge ourselves. So we wanted to think about, this surface, this site, 90 by 13, how many things could we, how many things we would have to get into the site. And so if you go to the next slide, so you can read some of these. The other side of the coin was that, like I said, we were in the drought and, really had this ambition to really think about sites. Every site in Los Angeles could be a little bit like a stormwater filtration machine or a sponge. And if every site could do that in LA, that would be so much better for our infrastructure, water infrastructure, LA River, the pollutants that get out to the ocean. If we could all do that, it would be so wonderful. And then of course, capturing all the water we can because we were in this drought. So thinking about the site, making it as permeable as possible. We wanted to consider gray water, but it was not in the cards at that time. I think, there were still things we were working out. So, we couldn't take that up. So if you could go to the next slide. So we started to think about the surface as a series of units that could be interchangeable, could take fire truck loading, parking, pedestrian uses, activities, of course, planting to absorb stormwater. Anything that we wanted to throw at it, we could do it on this surface. And so that was the approach that we took, was just really high level of flexibility, I think. And so if you could go to the next slide. So, at the same time, this was, we were told this was with formerly homeless veterans, and we didn't know, at the time how mobile these people would be. And so we wanted to create a surface that was very universally accessible, no steps, just gentle slopes, so that it had this very communal effect into bringing people together. So we thought, okay, it's a native field. That's how we found it. And if we simply, and then the building, the way, so Michael Maltzan Architecture is the architect of this project. And the way the architects had approached it, it almost had a very light touch on the ground plane, which was really great. But then when you started to factor in the parking and the fire lane, the whole site started to erode, and it was really troubling to me, to us, because we thought, gosh, if these people are not very mobile, this may be their park, because the next park was, you're in the valley. So, it was like 3 miles away. And if they weren't very mobile, how would they get there? So we really had this strong ambition to obviously satisfy, all our drought conditions, but really make this place a park in a sense. And it just couldn't bear the fact that this parking and fire lane was going to destroy that possibility. So we started to challenge ourselves to kind of free ourselves from our preconceptions, I would say, and really think, what was the code saying and how we could reinterpret its surface expression. So we thought, could we take this fire lane back, and make it into a much more passive recreational use? And could we do that to the parking as well? we were required to have 32 parking spaces, and we got it down to 18. But even 18 on this very small site, it just seemed almost impossible. We did it though, but if we started to, so the thought was if we started to reinterpret these two pieces and make them much more multi-purposed, we could create a place for landscape. The entire site could be a landscape. Next, please. So this is the plan that we came up with, and you can see the landscape commands the entire ground plane. And it's in collaboration, of course, with the architect, Michael Maltzan Architecture. And essentially, Michael had been thinking about the LA housing typology, the Dingbat house, where you have units on the second level and you have parking on the ground floor, underneath the units. And so, thinking about that, and of course, underground parking would be cost prohibitive. We had to have the parking on the ground plane. So he lifted the building up, which was really great in the sense of the landscape could then command that ground plane and stretch property line to property line and really give context to the building in that sense. So we still, we did provide all the programs that the building needs, reception, community kitchen, dining terraces, office space for the service providers, trash and all of that you need. We even in addition to that, we have the 18 parking spaces, the firehead turnaround, which you can kind of make out in the front, and then even 2 bioswales that would take the roof rainwater and filter through there. And then community gardens in the back. So if you go to the next slide. So we created every space that was not covered by the building was completely permeable. And I believe that is the reason why we were able to achieve LEED Platinum, is because of that. It's also because all the plants are low water. So in a sense, the entire site was permeable. And then taking the roof rainwater through, that was, in addition. So I could say we effectively treated all the water that was falling on our site. And you can see the building lifted up off the ground. That's where the parking spaces were. If you go to the next slide. So the planting, you can see it's a very unmanicured type of landscape. And there's this really ease of flow between the inside and the outside. And it's almost the landscape is kind of slipping underneath the building. And in that sense, it creates this sort of borderless landscape, I would say, where you have this sensation of the landscape extending way beyond its property lines because of that. If you go to the next slide. So I'm just kind of taking you through the building. That was the dining terrace. So we're coming back behind the dining terrace now. And you can see the driveway that we created with the meadow-like field in the background. And in the foreground is one of the swales we have, and was surrounded by native planting. Yeah, next slide. This is the swale in the back. And again, you see the building lifted up off the ground plane and the landscape coming right underneath it, extending through. And I'm sorry, there's a knocking on the door. Extending through. And it's a mix. So the park, if you go to the next slide. So the parking, so this is underneath the building. And so the parking, we really worked hard to disguise the parking. We didn't want to ever recognize that there was parking ever on this site. So we played with this paving pattern and the texture and the directional movement of how one would experience parking here and walking through the site. And it's really quite a lovely space, I would say. It's very cool. We're in the heat of the valley, gets up to 115. And it's kind of like a breezeway almost. So you can see the play of the light fixtures and the patterning of the building overhead, contrary to the paving patterns. And it creates a very dynamic, intense space, actually. Next slide. So we've stepped out from underneath the belly of the building, and we're in the community garden now. And you can see we continue to play with that idea of what is parking, what is landscape, with this kind of parking. Those are parking spaces actually in the background, with the electric charging station there in the background. Next slide. And so I just want to leave you with this idea. This is an actual parking space that's vegetated. And so, we had been thinking about, what is Third LA? What's the next chapter in LA? It was the rise of mass transit was really starting to take off. And so we thought, why do we need this parking? Can it be something else? And so we chose to kind of explore that idea. And that's Crest Apartments.
That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Yeah, this was so inspiring. And what's inspiring is it's built. So it's one thing to be in the charrette and see some awesome drawings by a cool designer, and you're
Yes.
like, sure.
Yes.
Expect to go out and see some like striped asphalt, and then you go out there and you're like, oh my God, this actually happened. Like there's the the fire lane, which is the bane of
Yes.
so many people trying to do compact urban development, and you like found a way to be like, well, if a fire truck ever needs to come in here, like there's a there's a surface that can support it, but it doesn't
Right.
have to be a driveway.
Right.
So
Right.
I think it's very beautifully done and very inspiring, to kind of, and in context, because like you said, there is no park nearby, and it's a harsh environment, once you leave the building. So, you really
Right.
did need to make a space for people who are formerly homeless, not going to work every day or whatever, probably spending a lot of time at the building, to be able to be outside in nature, having some sort of biophilic interaction.
Right.
All the kind of things we've talked about with COVID, a nearby place to go and commune with nature that so many have
Exactly.
looked for.
And if I could just add, one of the greatest rewards I had was I obviously spent a lot of time there, even after the project was done, just checking everything. Over a year I spent, going back there. And one of the greatest things I heard that was so rewarding was that the residents really felt like it was home for them. And I think the success of it was really this kind of unmanicured state of the landscape, because, you imagine these people were living on the streets. And so the site was a sense, the home, and not the unit itself. So the more that they could share that outdoor space and to celebrate it, they felt much more at ease at Crest Apartments versus other places. So that was the greatest reward I had.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that's great. Okay, well, thanks again. And then let's
Welcome.
hand it over to Brian. Also have done some housing for the formerly homeless and thought quite a bit about these sort of open spaces and interstitial spaces at the villages. So take it away.
Yeah. Thank you, Tina. Really amazing work. So I'm going to talk to you about the villages at Cabrillo, but before going there, I just want to say a bit about Century Housing. There's, I think, some interesting context and some parallels. So Century Housing itself, we're a nonprofit. We actually grew out of an environmental justice movement in litigation around the creation of the 105 freeway in Los Angeles. There was massive litigation that was presided over by Judge Harry Pregerson. The lawsuit was settled, and the state agency was set up to go out and replace some 4,500 units of affordable housing in a band around the future 105 corridor. And so that agency went about its business. It accomplished its original charter. And by the mid-90s, the judge decided to, rather than having all the assets revert back to the state, to have this agency spun off into a private 501c3. So we were born from the state in 1995 with the mission of expanding affordable housing throughout initially Southern California, but now more broadly throughout California. So within the first couple of years of Century's existence, we made a massive investment in this 27-acre property in Long Beach that we now know as the Villages at Cabrillo. It was a former Navy housing site that was tied to the shipyards. And as many of you may know, the shipyards were kind of the major industry in Long Beach and they left town in the early to mid 90s, and so it left a gaping hole in the economy here. There was a lot of excess real estate that was conveyed for other uses, and this 27 acres was carved out and conveyed to us under the McKinney Act, which requires the property to be used for the benefit of the homeless. So we took title to this property that had scores of dilapidated and vandalized buildings on it, aging and failing infrastructure. And we have, over the course of 23 years now, gone about the business of revitalizing and transforming this campus into a really thriving community. We've done this over the course of maybe 5 or 6 phases of development, depending on how you count. But tonight, we're home to about 1,500 residents, all of whom were either at risk of homelessness or previously were experiencing homelessness, and this Villages at Cabrillo has become a home for them. So we play an important role here. We do the development, the management. We are a resident service provider here as well, but I think what we really are known for here is this idea of being a convener of other organizations. So we have about 30 partners that participate in this model. We consider this a collective impact model. For some of you that are involved in community development, it's this whole movement of developing a shared vision and bringing partners together to lend their skills and assets to solve a complex problem that can't be solved by any one organization alone. And for us, that issue is the complex issue of homelessness that we continue to grapple with. So 1,500 residents, we have about 253 staff across all of our partners here on campus. And together we really embrace this idea of housing as a most basic form of healthcare. And in fact, we have 2 on-site healthcare providers, one being the VA that operates an outpatient clinic, but we also have another family health center operated by TCC Family Health that provides primary health care for all of our residents here at the Villages. So Walker asked me to talk a little bit about how green kind of entered the equation for us. And for us, the reality is it really wasn't about a kind of a moral or philosophical commitment to sustainability. It wasn't necessarily about trying to reduce water consumption and energy consumption to save dollars, although we like to do that. But I think those are good motivations, and we certainly share some of those motivations. But really, at the core, it's for us about the health and wellness of our residents. And this, I think, speaks to the equity piece that Kim and Walker spoke to earlier in the book as being kind of one of the primary frames for this move towards sustainability. So for us, we're located in West Long Beach. We're in an industrial area. We're literally on the front lines of an environmental justice battle of our own. There's a massive intermodal rail yard that's planned directly across the street from us that we've actually gone into litigation with a number of other partners, and we've succeeded in slowing the pace of that development and forcing that developer to go back to the drawing boards and revisit the EIR, which was insufficient. So we're very sensitive. You know, our residents are vulnerable. They have lots of chronic health conditions. We're downwind of many of the port uses. You know, the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles carry half of the nation's cargo container traffic. We've got freeways around us. We've got a refinery across the freeway from us. So for us, it's really about creating a healthy place, as healthy as we can make it for our families, our veterans, our children. And we do that by focusing on the environment, both interior and exterior. And there's a number of ways we've gone about that. We certainly have embraced advocacy as part of our community development mission. I spoke about some of the legal advocacy we've been involved with, but from a physical development perspective, we've also been very busy here. We've completed 2 major developments over the past couple of years, and we have more on the way. So I'm going to share with you 2 examples, one called Anchor Place, one called Cabrillo Gateway. Kim, you can go ahead and flip the slide. This is an aerial view of the overall campus, the 27 acres. You can see some of the newer development on the bottom part of your slide, and you can see some of the older naval housing that's scattered throughout. Over time, we'll replace that naval housing with more energy efficient buildings that are more responsive to the needs of our residents. Next slide, please. So Anchor Place is actually our most recently completed development here. It provides 120 supportive homes for both veterans and families that previously experienced homelessness. We have a wealth of community gardens and landscaping. You can see on the left-hand side of the slide, there's a long fire lane that we worked hard with our landscape architect and architect to not make it feel like it's a traditional fire lane. There's some variegation in terms of the paving, and there's a fair amount of landscaping that borders both sides of it. We've got a lot of space both inside and outside the building for community use and supportive services. We have case management offices for our VA staff, for our own internal case managers, for our occupational therapy and MSW interns that we work with local universities that to provide. The building ended up being LEED Platinum. I think one of the things we're probably most proud about with this development is that we were able to secure an inaugural award of affordable housing and sustainable community funding from the Strategic Growth Council in California. And those are resources that are made available through our cap and trade auctions that invest in creating affordable housing in disadvantaged communities, of which we are one here in West Long Beach. So you're not seeing it on this slide. You can actually skip to the next couple of slides if you like, Kim. But one of the things we did with that ASIC funding is develop a bus stop within our campus, and we brought a Long Beach Transit line that was previously outside our campus into the heart of our campus. And that was big because many of our residents have children, many are disabled, and we made access to transit, which many of our residents, I should say, rely on. We made it that much more convenient, accessible, and safe. And there was an elaborate process we went through. There was some resistance internally to this idea of bringing transit into the heart of our campus, but over time, I think we've grown accustomed to it, and we see it as a real benefit for our residents. One of the other things that we've done with both Anchor Place and Cabrillo Gateway is, with respect to our HVAC systems, we've gone above and beyond what's required by the code, and we've installed these double filtration systems. So we're filtering air on the intake, and then there's a secondary filter for the recirculating air within the apartment. So it's expensive to operate because we've got MERV 16 filters that are basically duplicated within the apartment. But for us, given that we're downwind of so much industrial activity, it made sense and is certainly justified to make that kind of investment in our in the indoor or interior air quality for our residents. You can move to the next slide, please. We'll keep going until we get to Cabrillo Gateway. These are some additional shots of Anchor Place. So Cabrillo Gateway was completed back in 2015. It provides 81 supportive homes for families that previously experienced homelessness. This development features a ground floor federally qualified health clinic that's operated by TCC Family Health. So we developed for them a 2,500 square foot clinic. We're very proud to bring them into the collaboration here at the Villages. They now operate a 40-hour-a-week clinic that serves all of our residents, including veterans that may not feel comfortable accessing health care at the VA. So they've been very busy, obviously, this year in particular with respect to the pandemic. We also, you can skip forward a couple of slides, Kim. Yeah, you can see here there's a large green space outside of Cabrillo Gateway that is lovingly dubbed our Grand Lawn. It's a major gathering space for our community. We have all kinds of events there. Normally in the winter, we'll bring snow in for the kids and we'll do a nice holiday event. But it also serves as an important detention basin. We're located in West Long Beach in an area where we've got a very high water table. We're close to the ocean. And we also, unfortunately, are in a geography where the storm drain capacity downstream of us is inadequate. And so when we get heavy rains, it's not atypical for our campus to literally fill up like a bathtub. And so this development provided a significant expansion of our on-site detention capabilities. Below the grade, we have an elaborate network of pipes that also store some of that storm drain water before it's able to be flushed out downstream of us. It's an interior space. This development also achieved a LEED Platinum credential, which we were very proud about. This was our first LEED Platinum development. So as we completed both of these developments back in 2017, we essentially ate up most of the remaining land at the Villages, and we began thinking about what the future holds. we initiated our third master planning process at the Villages over the course of our 23 years. And that process evolved and ultimately became a specific plan that's before the city right now, and we hope will be adopted by early next year. That will provide an updated entitlement package for us. But we also took the master plan and we submitted for a LEED for neighborhood development certification. And last year, we finally, after an extensive effort, and Walker was a huge part of this, we achieved that certification for the master plan. So we're very excited about that. We're actually in the throes of our next phase of development. And actually, while we were on the call today, I just got confirmation that the city of Long Beach has just approved a $4 million investment in our next phase, phase 6, which is the first new phase that's contemplated by this new master plan. So we're super excited about that, and we've got probably 7 or 8 additional phases planned over time as we take down some of the old naval housing stock that's very inefficient. It's congregate in style, which in the midst of a pandemic is not the type of housing we would prefer to be operating. And we'll replace that with new energy efficient studios and 1-bedrooms, and even some family housing that's more appropriate for our population. So I'll conclude there. I think, one thing I'll say about Walker is over the course of our relationship, and I do remember that original charrette we had at Century way back when, he's really helped us take this idea of sustainability from beyond a building perspective and really thinking about it from a neighborhood scale perspective. And we're excited also because we've taken this model that's been established here at the Villages, and we're involved in a number of other master plan community developments, one of which is at the West LA VA, an 80-acre site on the north side of the campus there that'll become home to some 1,800 veterans over the course of the next couple of decades. So a lot of what we learned here at the Villages we'll be applying in other communities, and are really excited about that.
Okay. Well, great, Brian. Thank you so much for walking us through that and a bit of this sort of journey through sustainability. You reminded me of a couple of things. We had to sort of invent that dual filtration system the first time around with Gateway, and there were all this sort of perception that there was poor air quality due to the port, due to being next to PCH, and I was always really proud of this as we actually looked up the data from the air quality management sort of monitoring station that was close by enough, found that it was a lot of PM10 and particulate matter that actually could be captured with a filter. And then effectively, mechanical engineers sort of cooked up that first version of that inline filter. Now that approach is pretty standard. So I think it was a bit of a prototype or a sort of an innovation that was born out of necessity. And lastly, I just say, sort of said you had a master plan and took it through LEED ND, but what was actually going on was this kind of back and forth about like, here's your housing needs, here's what LEED ND is asking for. And it's one of the LEED ND projects I found most rewarding because we really were able to use LEED ND to sort of evolve the plan over time. It wasn't just kind of coming in and documenting good practice, post facto. So it was a way to see how these rating systems can be a design tool, not just a certification mechanism. Okay, Ben. Are you doing the Q&A?
I'm happy to help moderate there as needed. If anyone has questions, feel free to put those into the chat, or you can just go ahead and raise your hand and ask away. I think we have a relatively informal group here.
Okay. So we'll just give you the place where you can, if you haven't already bought the book, you can get it here at Island Press, and you can use Walker's last name, Wells, as a code to get 20% off. And if you're not looking for the
I'm
same,
going to do it right now. I'm just going to go and put myself out there right now.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Holidays are just around the corner.
that's good. That's good.
It may seem a little wonky, but
I'm not sure if every member of my family would appreciate it, Walker, but some of them like it. Yeah.
I don't know. Tim's preface is
your board directors, your thank you for your service gifts. You could think of a lot of different ways.
Now you're being too creative. This is going to hurt me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can, I can stop the share so that we can all see each other. And then I'll just put this in the chat so that people can link to it from there.
Does anybody have any questions?
Surely there are questions.
Well, I have one for Tina to start us off. So
Oh,
what's next?
okay.
You mentioned a project with Jonathan Rose. So
Oh, yes. Okay, so yes, so we are doing housing in Los Angeles with Jonathan Rose. And that's a project with Brooke Scarpa and a slew of people on the team. And it's about 137 units of affordable housing in very close to downtown. Actually, it's between like near the Pico Union area, I would say. It's yeah, it's a tall building, so it's a high rise building. I think not a tower, but high rise in what LA considers the threshold. Yeah, so it'll be interesting because Jonathan obviously. So I mentioned to Jonathan I was giving you of course, and he wrote the foreword. So yeah, it's all good. So we're hoping to have sustainability is going to be high on our minds. We're thinking about all electric. We're thinking, mass timber. We're going for it. Yeah. So, yeah. So I hope you can afford it. But yeah, I think we really have high aspirations for this project. Yeah, so I can't probably say much more than that, but we're trying to go for it for here with this project.
excellent.
Yeah.
Great. And Brian, are you have anything on the horizon? Things you want to get to? Net zero, all electric. Everybody wants all electric. There's this holy grail of on-site gray water reuse that we just never quite seem to pull off. Any of those in the cards?
I think one of the things you mentioned is this idea of right-sizing systems, and that's something we're really thinking about is we've had some challenges with getting residents educated on how to use the thermostats that we have in the apartments and getting even our own operation teams. And by the way, I'm joined today by Brett Morales, our VP of Property Management, and Renee Castro, our Director of Community Engagement. So that whole education piece internally, both staff and residents, is a piece I think we're focused on as we deliver our next project here at the Villages.
Okay, great.
I think
Great.
there's some
So we've had
questions. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Kim.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, Noemi Martinez, sorry if I didn't say your name correctly. She says, are we hopeful that affordable housing will be a bigger issue now? Is there an opportunity? In Boston, affordable housing has been, and in Massachusetts, affordable housing has been a big issue for a long time. And we're fortunate to have pretty good state support and a lot of local support for affordable housing. I've been interested in watching the conversation in LA and the growing demand for more consistent affordable housing and plans and zoning and funding to make it happen. So I think I'm hopeful. And with the incoming Biden administration, there's going to be a big focus on energy efficiency and retrofits of existing housing. And a lot of that is going to be targeted to the affordable housing world. So I am hopeful that there's going to be a renewed commitment to green for both new and existing affordable housing as we move into a new administration. So, and then Winfred, you had a question about funding sources. Well, it is true that public funding comes with a lot of complications, and it's dealing with bureaucracies. what my experience has been is that there are certain organizations, both for profit and nonprofit, that just decide that they're going to figure out how to make those systems work to accomplish what they want to do. And so they just go ahead and figure out how to access the money and deal with the bureaucracy and answer the questions. And maybe Brian, you can speak to the challenges of finding the funding and dealing with public funding sources, just to help people understand why you go through that brain damage to do what you do.
Well, it's a passion, and making all these capital sources work is the crux of the space we operate in. So any of these deals, like the Anchor Place deal I shared with you, had 12 different sources of financing. So that's 12 different applications for different, whether they be grants or subsidized loans from public agencies, each of which has their own regulatory requirements, their own design requirements, and it can become a real puzzle making everything work. And then the other overlay here is that these regulations are constantly changing. And I don't, one thing that's I think relevant and timely right now is some of you may have already seen the proposed reg changes that are out right now with TCAC, which is the allocation body for tax credits in the state of California. Tax credits are the basic building block that all affordable housing uses, and they've now are proposing to eliminate their entire sustainable building methods point category, with the logic that cost containment is a big concern in California. Why is it costing affordable housing so much per unit? $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a door, but also with the perception that the California building code is increasingly requiring more and more green and sustainable systems and requirements, and so they've eliminated that now, that, or are proposing to eliminate that competitive point category. So, not only are there not only is there a labyrinth of requirements, but the requirements are continually changing, which makes our world a challenge.
Yeah, well, on those TCAC regs, there's a huge volume of letters being written saying, what are you doing? We've been building up these good standards for 15 years. Why just kind of pull the rug out? And it's been interesting to see how many developers, have said, this is something that we've grown accustomed to and can do cost effectively. Why would you take it out of the regs? Yeah. The other thing is just frustrated people. It kind of came out of, I don't know if it's nowhere, but it's abrupt. So it wasn't like they asked. So it'd be much better to have kind of a more inclusive process to figure that out. But yeah. Looks like we have another question. Yes, what can people learn from what we're doing and seeing in LA and California generally? That's a good question, Clara. What's been so valuable about this book writing process with Kim is that we've been able to be on either side of, on either coast. And I would say these things, emphatically, like nobody ever does that thing. And Kim would say, well, we do that all the time in Boston. And so I think the desire to kind of capture the breadth of experience is in the book and in the case studies, and to acknowledge that, sure, some places may be farther ahead, but I think we emphasize again and again about these fundamentals, like design process, good building envelope, thinking about how water moves through your building, ventilation, not bringing in toxic materials. And you get so much value just out of those fundamental strategies. And I believe strongly out of sort of just base level certification, and that should be part and parcel of every project. And then sure, if people are able to go farther or want to go farther, great, let them pursue that. But those core aspects of green building, really do make fundamentally better buildings. There was just this other thing about other financing paths. I think what we learned in the financing is you kind of have to look at what it is you're trying to pay for. So all kinds of interesting financing pathways are opening up for solar and storage, whether it's power purchase agreements or virtual net metering, factoring in the resilience benefits. So it's not like financing is kind of a monolithic entity. We're trying to sort of pick off the different pieces that we're trying to find money for. And then once you do that, I think there are ways to be creative. Look, Brian got a bus stop included in his campus, through a cap and trade program. So which made it a much better neighborhood, a much better LEED ND project. So I think there's ways to be creative and sort of, almost like surgical and trying to figure out what it is you're trying to pay for and finding the money to make it happen. All right, here's a question for you, Tina.
Yeah,
Okay.
great question.
Yes. So, so the question is, what are some of the challenges that you typically face during your design process, whether social, ecological, environmental, and how do these challenges vary from project to project? I have to say, it's really the client, like in any project. I think, Skid Row has a very, they have a mission, and I think one of the techniques, I always try to create a narrative, a landscape narrative, and I think this narrative really pushes through and helps people understand what our goals are when we're trying to fight through VE and cost measures, because we have to remember what's the end goal and what we're trying to achieve. So I think understanding and defining that mission and of course, listening to that client, that's always key. I think one of the challenges that we always face, are budgets and most likely, supportive housing, affordable housing, it's even tighter and leaner. And so I think you have to be able to keep that design vision, intact, because if you lose that vision, it gets so watered down. It can get so watered down. It's not going to mean anything. So, being very strategic into where you're going to, I mean, this applies to any project, but probably even more so here, clean lines, trying to really, multi-purpose things is one of the things I constantly try to do. And so it's harder to take something away when it does 3 different things than if it only does one thing. And you make your arguments, and you say, it does this, this, and that, and it's harder to take away, and it's all good stuff, and so you try to get through with that. So, landscape, it's wildlife, it's stormwater, it's open space, obviously, and of course we care about design very much, and its spatial quality and perception of it. So, so there's that. You're going to have to change your design many, many times because funding gets cut. Things change, sources change. So you just have to be very flexible, I would say. I don't think hanging on to a specific design is going to get you anywhere. You just have to be able to keep that vision, but be flexible enough to make these certain modifications, modulations to it. And so that's why the vision is important. Environmental, we just, you're going to work with the civils, of course, yeah, specifically for landscape, civil, and, so hopefully you get it's always good to work with people like-minded, but, it's not always the case. But, I think if, strong logic always wins. So again, the narrative, I think, is going to be key. So
Yeah, well, that's great.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Tina. Well, Kim, I thought we might try and touch at this kind of at the very closing here, just touch back on equity. I know at Greenbuild, there was a all in on equity, I think it might be called, measure. And Kim, you were involved in both equity summits. And one of them, you sort of spoke specifically about affordable housing. So it's exciting to me that we're talking about green building, but we're also talking about housing for homeless and housing as a platform for health. So any sort of final thoughts on this sort of equity through housing topic?
Especially speaking to a USGBC chapter, it's very exciting to see USGBC making this strong public commitment to equity. And I certainly advocated for in the summits and hope we'll continue to see a reinvestment in affordable housing on the part of USGBC. which was a strong component of their programs earlier, but has been a little less supported recently. So, Walker and I certainly believe that green affordable housing is an important way to bring equity both into housing and into sustainability. And so we hope that our book is a resource that helps more people deliver good, green, affordable housing better.